What makes indie games so special? Well, when it comes to games like Hollow Knight, Cuphead, and definitely one of my personal favorite, Fist, these are games that are kind of represent that platformer, that Metroidvania, that essence of what we all know when it comes to really retro gaming in the 80s and the 90s, especially games that are very popular to this day, like Mario, Sonic, Metroid. Like these are all significant Donkey Kong, significant titles that are legendary, and indie games to this day still represent this format. But kind of this indie aspect is something, I wouldn't say it foreshadows what the retro essence of the games are, it just keeps it in a throwback sense. So I really love what indie games do these days, because all they're doing is really, if you played a game like Celeste is a great example of how Sonic is usually played. Very fast paced, very, I don't know, just the puzzles and everything is incredible in Celeste. You gotta play some of these indie games. If you love all these other platformer games, or if you're an OG like myself, I feel that the indie category or the genre is really much something that you should have in your library. And not to mention, indie games are actually very solid when it comes down to cozier type gameplay, or games that are very fruitful and colorful. It may not have the best graphics in the world. Of course, their budget is far less than the superior titles and the superior devs that we all know, in the budgets and the marketing and everything like that. But there is a lot of greatness in these indie games. You can feel the purity and the specializations of what indie games do. In recent times, I was playing Cuphead, and make no mistake, first of all, the artwork is amazing in Cuphead, by the way. But second of all, make no mistake, it may look like something that's just kind of like you're gonna jump in a platform and you can just like just run and gun all day, although there's literally titles in the stages that are called run and gun in Cuphead. It's not the simplicity of just run and gun when it comes to Cuphead. There is a lot of patterns you gotta recognize. There's a lot of advanced bosses that you really like. It is known for these boss type movements. Hollow Knight actually has also a lot of depth in that game, despite it the way it looks when you kind of just want to judge it by its cover. There's a lot of depth in Hollow Knight also. So Cuphead and Hollow Knight are some of the cool games that you can ever play when it comes to the indie segue titles. If you're trying to expand your gaming library, indie titles is something that I recommend for everyone, because there's been a lot of times on this channel where I talk about retro games and it gets very solid love, and I appreciate y'all for that, because retro games are something that I grew up with. But when I go into the indie titles, it also reminds me a lot of these games. That's why I had mentioned earlier, like Celeste kind of reminds me of like Sonic. Cuphead can remind you of like Contra or like Metal Slug, and all these games that, or just Metroid being Metroidvania games, because Metroid commercialized the term Metroidvania, you know what I mean? So the indie games do so well with this. You can tell that from soundtracks, gameplay, to a cozy essence, but that's not too easy when it comes to these games, is why I appreciate indie games the most. And indie, I feel, represents what gaming is when it comes to simplicity and gaming on the go. For those that have a Switch, know that a lot of these titles are very fun. When I played Fist, these are games that kind of have an alignment of amazing graphics. Metroid Dread is another one, right? When I think of games like Prince of Persia, like Metroid has a higher budget, but then you look at games like Fist and you're like, man, this is actually really good. They kind of correlate with each other, right? There's something there where it's like, man, you can line them up and it almost looks like they're both AAA titles, and I really appreciated that so much. And when Mario releases games, especially Wonder, was like, you jump into that game and you're like, wow, this is the exact platformer that I grew up with in the 80s and the 90s. And then you look at other indie games that really try segues like this. Almost every roguelite, a lot of RPG games are still like this. And there's tons of indie games I have not touched base on, but I just really love everything about it. It brings a simplicity and a joy, and something if you're just kind of burned out on PvP all day. And that's what I like to talk about when it comes to indie games. What makes them so special is that although they look very much ease and simplified, and it looks like it's just like it's just like a lower graphic tier game, I don't really like it, I'm gonna judge it by the cover. In reality, it can be it's diverse. It can be something where it provides like new challenges. To this day, we still have NES World Championships, and that was the foundation for what indie games are still doing to this day. Indie is still a term, like what I said earlier, it foreshadows the aspects of what retro had eventually evolved into. I feel that retro games are literally, you know, a aspect of what, it's like the Spider-Man meme, right? Pointing at each other. Like indie games and retro games are kind of just like pointing at each other. And the indie is the futuristic version, but that kept way more of its aspects and fundamentals, while retro games, of course, are retro games. They set the tone for how gaming is. and there's always going to be an audience for it, because literally indie games just had their own showcase. They had so many things that they're still really offering. Even horror games are still going the indie route. There's so much as to how indie is going to continuously win, especially now as gamers are really, and I like to transition into this because this is very important also, not just the diversity of what actual indie games can provide in the long haul, the support of it, and then going into double A, right? Because it goes from indie, then double A, then more and more. But although double A can still be technically indie, the Helldivers 2 component, that's how it starts graduating, right? You know, you got Hellblade, you got Helldivers 2, you got Power World, Evil West, you got Remnant, and these are all games that were really, really good. And then Game Pass is also a great essence as to what's happening with a lot of the indie and double A games. They're really picking up on them, and they're just straight up like giving us tons of titles that we had never thought we would be able to play. And that keeps it diverse. But also, so as games start to become far more of like live service and lots of charging, a lot of people have a lot of essences with the expansion and how expensive it is now in gaming. Indie games can still save you from a lot of that while providing a variety source. There's a lot of variety in indie gaming, and I was actually very shocked every time I look at the newer list. Like I look at the top 100 list on IGN, and I'm looking around, I'm like, whoa, these are great games. Like Outer Wilds was really, really huge. Hades, and then that's when I said earlier, like there's Celeste. I was like, wow. But the expansion library is what I really like. The variety, the cozy essence, and just what it can provide value-wise for your gaming library. And then it's, of course, a lot of them are free. A lot of them are lower priced. A lot of them, like, there's a lot of different routes that you can try with indie games. And I really, really like that, especially if you reach out to the developers. They're willing to like work with you at times. They're willing to do stuff like in terms of just whether it's a win-win situation for both a creator and a dev, or if it's just simply to try it out and get feedback. You know, indie devs are really, really cool with that also. And I really appreciate the pursuit of that, especially as gaming gets larger and larger. Sometimes it gets left in a gray scale of what gaming really meant to a lot of us. And therefore, indie games, I think they bring back this nostalgia feel. Like what I said, it's like the Spider-Man meme pointing back to retro games. A lot of indie games basically are retro games, and even better at times. Games like Cuphead still blow my mind to this day. It's an incredible game, by the way. And Hollow Knight too. But yeah, as everything really happens and everybody's just all about graphics these days and all this crazy advanced mechanisms in gaming, it's crazy that a basic game that is at least deemed basic, such as indie games or the budget of indie devs or marketing, whatever it may be that goes around in that continuation of that, it's just very cool to see the love and the purity and the art that and the art and the heart in the art that goes into these games. Because man, I'm telling y'all, playing Cuphead and Hollow Knight, man, it is one of the coolest experiences. Outer Wilds is still really good too. So y'all got to be letting me know what's up. And then of course, honorable mention for me is Fist. And there's a huge list of a lot of cool indie games, but those are some of my favorite ones that I've been playing recently on rotation. And you know, all those games have a common denominator, and that common denominator being the fact that these games really remind me of the retro output of gaming back in the 80s and 90s. I was born in the 90s, so I was like, oh hell yeah, this reminds me of just simplified gaming. And a lot of these, like what I said, can go back to just relaxing days if you want to decompress. And then some of these still have major challenges to where it almost damn well, almost as much as a battle royale challenge or a Souls game challenge. You know what I mean? Like these games, some of these are really, really tough. Cuphead is really tough, but it's really, really fun. So yeah, I just wanted to share my insights on indie games just because they don't get a lot of love. I want to use this channel to kind of spread awareness on that and retro games and just talking about gaming totality. But also the fact that as gaming continuously evolves, I feel that indie is always going to have a route because there are their own types of publishers at times and all of that. So it's cool. It's kind of like making music as an artist, and you don't go through the main distributors, but you kind of just build your own essence and build your own rapport and continuously stay indie. See, the thing is that indie is always known as like not having a lot of budgeting, but if gaming keeps evolving, I believe like indie games will be able to have the budgeting and still remain indie so that they can stay true to what consumers really love. Kind of like just an independent artist on a label, you know? So that's just kind of my thoughts, but indie games are the route to go, and I've been enjoying them lately, especially them in retro games. Ooh, man, indie AA retro games is kind of the route is where my heart's at right now, because it really reminds me of why I started gaming, why I started talking about gaming, why I got invested in gaming and everything like that. AAA will always be cool, but sometimes it does get stale a lot faster than some of these games that I actually mentioned, man. So it's insane. I appreciate y'all though, man. Have a good one. Peace. Let me know y'all's thoughts too.